In 1915, Italy joined World War I on the side of the Entente, and the command immediately faced a strategic challenge, breaking through the defenses of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in a rugged mountain landscape. The alpine terrain created serious obstacles for any offensive. Troops had to negotiate sheer cliffs and narrow passes while under heavy artillery and machine gun fire from an enemy holding the commanding heights. The nature of the terrain made any advance extremely risky and led to heavy casualties. Searching for a technical solution that could turn the tide and provide an advantage against fortified positions, military leadership called for the creation of new machinery. In October 1915, the Fiat concern received a government order to develop an armored vehicle to support the infantry and break through enemy lines. The company's engineers set to work, but creating a fundamentally new type of weapon took more time than originally planned. The design and calculation process dragged on. Given the slow pace of domestic development, the government decided to purchase armored vehicles from France, which already had manufacturing experience in this field. Schneider tanks were delivered to the country, followed later by light Renaults, which at the time formed the backbone of Italy's armored forces. Even though foreign machines were now in service, Fiat specialists continued working on their own project, striving to achieve superior performance. Finally, by June 1917, the first prototype was ready for testing. The machine was only partially ready. The hull and chassis mechanics were already functioning, but the superstructure was a wooden mock-up since the metal parts hadn't been manufactured yet. Still, even in this form, the prototype drew the attention of military experts. When compared to the 6-ton French Renault, the difference in size was obvious. The Fiat 2000 weighed 40 tons, making it one of the largest combat vehicles of the World War I era. Later, a second prototype was built with changes to the basic design. Despite the external resemblance, there were technical differences between the models. On the first prototype, the armored skirt consisted of several welded plates, while on the second, it was made of a solid metal piece. The layout of the machine guns was also changed. On the first machine, the armament was installed at the front and rear, but on the second, it was placed at the corners of the superstructure, which provided improved visibility and wider firing sectors. The vehicle's dimensions are substantial, even for military technology experts. The hull length exceeds 7.5 meters, the width is 3 meters, and the height reaches almost 4 meters. Due to its specific box-like design, the vehicle is often compared to a moving pillbox or a mobile fortress. The machine's weight is noticeably higher than that of its counterparts. For example, the German A7V tank, considered the heaviest in World War I, weighed 33 tons, while this model is 7 tons heavier. The armament suite matches the vehicle's massive size. The main weapon was a 65mm howitzer developed for combat in mountainous terrain. The artillery mount is placed in a dome-shaped turret on the upper part of the hull, which is a significant technical solution. The turret is capable of rotating 360 degrees, allowing fire in any direction without turning the chassis. Vertical aiming angles range from -10 to 75 degrees, ensuring the engagement of targets in both lowlands and on high ground. To protect against infantry, auxiliary weaponry is provided since a single howitzer isn't enough for that job. Firing ports are positioned around the hull, allowing for the mounting of up to 8 6.5mm Fiat Revelli machine guns. Their configuration is designed to provide all-around defense and eliminate dead zones, preventing the enemy from sneaking up undetected. The density of fire allows the vehicle to repel attacks from multiple directions. The armor protection is considered heavy by World War I standards. The steel plating on the sides and rear ranges from 10 to 15 millimeters, while the frontal armor reaches 20 millimeters, surpassing most tanks of that period. The hull geometry features a slight slope, but it isn't steep enough to be truly classified as sloped armor. Therefore, protection relies mainly on the physical thickness and strength of the metal, designed to withstand bullets and shrapnel. Originally, the plan called for a 10-man crew, with most of them assigned to man the machine guns. But later, experts concluded that firing all 8 machine guns at the same time was technically difficult and impractical, so the crew was cut down to 8. The driver sits front and center. He views the field through a periscope or a large hatch in the front of the hull. Opening that hatch is only allowed when not in combat to protect the crew from direct enemy fire. You enter the vehicle through a side hatch on the left. The crew is stationed in the fighting compartment, sitting right above the engine and transmission. A bulkhead separates the crew from the engine, which provides more room inside compared to foreign counterparts of the era, where the crew was often jammed right up against the running machinery. For power, it uses a 6-cylinder Fiat A12 aircraft engine, putting out about 250 horsepower. Using an aircraft engine meant they needed specific fuel, which created some logistical headaches. Because of the machine's sheer weight, its top speed on flat ground tops out at 6.5 kilometers per hour, comparable to a brisk walk. Military command didn't consider this a flaw, since the doctrine of the time held that tanks were for direct infantry support, not for deep independent breakthroughs of enemy defenses. The vehicle's speed just had to match the pace of the advancing infantry, so anything faster was considered unnecessary. The key function of this kind of armored vehicle is to suppress enemy fire and provide cover for advancing infantry, so a speed of 6 kilometers an hour is seen as acceptable. However, despite the stated specs, the long production cycle became a major problem, meaning the Fiat 2000 risked missing the active phase of the conflict entirely. The project faced a disconnect between the design concepts and the actual conditions on the ground. The machine turned out to be too large and not mobile enough for this specific theater of war. Italian troops were operating mainly in the mountainous alpine regions, where the roads are narrow tracks carved into the rock with very limited capacity. A 40-ton vehicle physically couldn't navigate most of the routes where the battles against Austro-Hungarian forces were taking place. Assembly of the second prototype continued until February 1918, just as Allied troops were preparing their offensive against the Central Powers. Ultimately, it became clear that the tank's technical performance fell short of expectations. On November 4, 1918, just days before the armistice was signed and the fighting stopped, the program was officially canceled. It took 3 years to develop the vehicle, yet it never saw action in the conflict it was designed for. However, the second prototype remained in use. Military command decided to redeploy the machine to the Piave River area, the site of the earlier Austro-Hungarian offensive. The tank was sent there for field trials. There are no confirmed reports of it engaging in actual combat. In all likelihood, the goal was to test its mobility and mechanical reliability on rough terrain under near-combat conditions. Following the end of World War I, there were no plans to continue producing the Fiat 2000. The two completed models remained the only ones of their kind, as ordering more was deemed impractical. The machine proved too costly and specialized for mass production, especially with the war over and the urgent need for armored vehicles gone. In 1919, circumstances arose that allowed for a practical test of the vehicle's combat capabilities. Local uprisings against the administration had broken out in the Italian colonies of North Africa. The situation in Libya demanded military intervention to restore control over the territory. A decision was made to deploy heavy armor, the Fiat 2000, to the region, though historical sources differ on the number of machines involved. According to some data, only the second prototype was shipped over, while other sources indicate that both tanks took part in the campaign. The armor joined an expeditionary corps tasked with seizing the city of Jebel, which was under rebel control. The operation was successful, and the town was taken by Italian troops. However, the details of the Fiat 2000's use during this mission remain unclear. No combat reports or evidence have survived to clarify the nature of the machine's deployment, whether they engaged in live fire or how effective they were in the African climate. Information regarding this operation remains incomplete, and historians continue to debate the tank's actual role in the Libyan campaign. Interestingly, decades later, a series of postage stamps featuring the Fiat 2000 was issued in Libya under Muammar Gaddafi. One of them commemorates a battle from 1913, which is a chronological anachronism, since the development of Italian tanks didn't begin until 2 years later, and the very concept of such weaponry wasn't even in use back then. This discrepancy illustrates how historical facts were interpreted to fit the political context of the time. After returning from Africa, the paths of the two prototypes diverged. The last known image of the first model dates back to 1924. Inventory records from 1925 and 1926 list only a single vehicle. The second unit is confirmed to have existed in the 1930s. Researchers assume the first model was scrapped. although no documentary evidence has been found to confirm this. The surviving machine remained in service in a different capacity, and in 1934 it underwent extensive modernization. As part of an upgrade, the front machine guns were removed and replaced with two 37mm cannons, boosting its firepower. This updated model was used to train troops and appeared at public events to show off the Italian Army's technical capabilities. However, after that period, records of the vehicle simply vanish. The exact fate of the last Fiat 2000 after 1934 remains a mystery. Mentions of the tank disappear from the paperwork. Military archives show no decommissioning orders, no transfer records to other units, and no scrapping reports. The heavy machine stopped appearing on official ledgers, and the reasons why were never documented. Historians have looked at various theories to explain what happened. According to the most common version, the tank was melted down to support the production of new equipment ahead of the looming war. The obsolete World War I design had no practical combat value, while its 40 tons of metal could be used to build modern weapons. By the start of World War II, this model was no longer on the equipment rosters. There are also theories that it might have been destroyed in bombing raids, abandoned in a warehouse, or used as a pillbox for coastal defense before eventually being scrapped. But these remain just theories, with no documents to back them up. Ultimately, the development of super heavy tanks was recognized as a dead end in armored warfare. Combat analysis proved the effectiveness of lighter, more maneuverable units. The next model adopted into service was the Fiat 3000, a licensed copy of the French Renault, weighing 5.5 tons. This model represented a different design approach, distinguishing itself from its massive predecessor with better cross-country ability and higher speeds. The Fiat 2000 went down in history as a prime example of engineering exploration, fraught with technical challenges. The tank was developed at a time when the optimal concept for armored vehicles hadn't really taken shape yet, and a lack of experience was compensated for by increasing size and adding more guns. Engineers believed that a massive design would improve protection and have a psychological impact on the enemy. But actual use revealed different priorities. Combat required maneuverable assault vehicles to break through defenses and push forward, not slow-moving static firing points. At the same time, the design featuring a rotating turret was a technical breakthrough, ahead of many foreign counterparts. Most tanks of the First World War were equipped with fixed weaponry or had a limited field of fire, which required turning the entire vehicle just to aim at a target. The model, with its fully rotating dome-shaped turret, anticipated the classic layout that would become the standard in the decades to follow. However, this cutting-edge solution was built on a platform that, in all other respects, turned out to be a technical dead end. The project clearly illustrates a problem common to all nations at the dawn of the armored era. Creating machines without a built-up base of theory and practice inevitably led to miscalculations. Every nation went through a process of trial and error, building prototypes to figure out the right direction for development. For Italy, the Fiat 2000 served as a test bed that highlighted the flaws of the chosen concept. Decades later, the vehicle acquired a certain historical value, remaining known mostly among specialists and military history researchers, while to the general public, this machine is virtually unknown. For a long time, photographs of the tank sat in archives, appearing only occasionally in specialized literature. The Fiat 2000 remained known mostly to military history experts, but in 2017 that changed. An Italian Association of Restorers, SPA Militare, discovered and acquired a full-scale wooden mock-up of the machine. This object, likely used for demonstration or training purposes in the past, made it possible to begin reconstructing the vehicle to its actual size. A fundraising campaign was launched to build a fully functional replica, complete with a working engine and all operational systems. The initiative drew support from enthusiasts in Italy and abroad. As funding came in, technical work began, spanning a total of 3 years. Specialists studied archival blueprints and surviving photographs while consulting with historians. Since there are no spare parts on the market for century-old machinery, components had to be manufactured by hand or custom ordered. The assembly of the hull and mechanisms, including the rotating turret, was carried out in strict accordance with historical specifications. By 2020, the work was complete and the Fiat 2000 replica was revealed to the public almost a century after the originals were lost. The finished model proved to be completely faithful to the original design requirements. This recreated model looks just like the original and is fully operational. The machine can drive, the mechanisms function, and the turret rotates. The restorers equipped the structure with a modern power unit that mimics the performance of the authentic Fiat A12 aircraft engine. When it moves, the 40-ton machine produces a characteristic noise and exhaust. The first demonstration of the running model drew a large crowd, giving people a chance to see technology from the First World War, the dawn of tank building, in action. The project's creators intend to use the replica not just for static displays, but also for filming, as well as renting it out for various events and reenactments. The plan is to use the revenue generated from operating this machine to fund the restoration of other rare examples of Italian armor. This initiative is viewed as a way to make historical restoration self-sustaining in order to preserve military heritage. The historical significance of the Fiat 2000 is rooted in events from a century ago. The tank is an example of a transitional period when traditional military doctrines coexisted with new technological solutions. Commanders of that time focused on positional and siege warfare, considered the concept of a mobile fortress to be practical. The advantages of maneuver warfare, where mobility and speed outweigh armor and firepower, were not yet obvious at that time. The Fiat 2000 was the realization of a concept, a mobile fortification on a tracked platform. The machine wasn't designed as a tank in the modern sense, but as a fire support vehicle intended to escort infantry and suppress enemy positions with artillery and machine gun fire. While theoretically sound, this approach faced implementation difficulties in the mountainous theater of operations. Austro-Hungarian forces held fortified positions on the high ground, which demanded different tactical solutions. The rugged terrain and narrow mountain paths made operating a 40-ton machine physically impossible. Furthermore, its massive size turned it into an easy target for artillery controlling the approaches from above. The nature of the conflict in the Alps called for specialized mountain units and light weaponry capable of being transported through the passes. North Africa became a potential region for deploying the Fiat 2000. Unlike the European landscape, the Libyan desert offered open spaces that allowed for the maneuvering of heavy machinery. However, information regarding the vehicle's actual combat use in this region remains incomplete. There are various theories that the tank was used for psychological effect, that it participated in shelling fortifications, or that it was stuck in repair due to technical failures. The lack of official documentation on the African campaign suggests that command didn't want to publicize the operational results. This could be due to unsatisfactory test outcomes or the fact that the vehicle never actually saw active combat despite the resources invested. The Italian armed forces spent a significant amount of time and money developing a heavy vehicle that in the end never saw actual combat against an enemy. Reliable details about the fate of the first prototype are unknown. The machine's disappearance sometime between 1924 and 1926 coincides with political shifts in Italy. At that time, the country's new leadership launched a massive modernization of the army, which involved scrapping obsolete equipment. One theory suggests that the first prototype was sent to be melted down as part of this process, alongside other hardware from World War I. The second unit survived longer as it was upgraded and adapted for publicity purposes. The ruling regime used the massive machine at parades and public events to showcase the state's military might. Swapping machine guns for artillery boosted the design's firepower, and using the vehicle for training allowed the troops to practice coordination between infantry and armor, even though the platform itself was becoming obsolete. During preparations for a major conflict and the rollout of a state rearmament program, this model finally lost its practical value. The new M and L series tanks entering service were lighter, more mobile, and carried more effective weaponry. Against this backdrop, the heavy machine became technically irrelevant, draining resources for storage and maintenance. Retiring the vehicle was the result of technological progress, and according to available data, it was scrapped sometime in the mid-1930s. No original prototypes have survived to this day, which would have been of great historical interest, so we can only judge the design based on archival photos and a modern replica. The Fiat 2000 represents an early stage in global tank development, serving as an example of engineering solutions that looked great on paper, but proved ineffective in real combat.